The courtroom was full that morning. People whispered in low voices. Papers shuffled. A few reporters sat quietly in the back. Everyone knew this wasn't just any hearing. This was something different. At the front sat a police officer, tall, stiff, serious. His uniform was perfectly neat. His hands were folded in front of him. He stared straight ahead, his face hard to read. Most people in the room knew who he was. He had been involved in a case that had shaken the whole town. Near. The middle of the room, on a long wooden bench, sat a young woman holding her son. The boy was small, no more than 3 years old, with curly brown hair and big, curious eyes. He sat still for a child his age, watching everything. His mother whispered something in his ear, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring toward the front of the room. The judge arrived and everyone stood. The room fell silent as the session began. People spoke. Witnesses took the stand. The police officer gave short, sharp answers. Everyone seemed tense, but the boy didn't seem scared. He sat quietly, his little hands resting on his lap. Then, just as another person was called to speak, the boy did something no one expected. He stood up. He stood right there on the bench, wobbling a little. His mother tried to pull him back down, whispering, "Sit, baby," but he didn't move. His eyes were locked on the officer at the front of the room, and then, in a voice clear and loud for someone so small, he said 2 words. "Hi, Daddy." The courtroom froze. For a moment, no one breathed. The officer didn't move. His face stayed still, almost too still. The judge looked up. A few people gasped. One of the reporters dropped their pen. The mother looked terrified. She reached up quickly, lifting the boy into her arms, whispering, "Shh, shh," as she held him close. But it was too late. Everyone had heard it. The police officer blinked. His jaw tightened. Then something in his expression cracked. He looked at the boy. Not just a glance, but a real look. His eyes softened just slightly, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. The judge cleared his throat. "Please keep the child quiet," he said firmly, trying to bring the room back to order. But the damage, or maybe the truth, was already done. The boy looked over his mother's shoulder, still watching the officer. His little hand reached out even from across the room. No one knew what was going to happen next. No one even knew what the real story was. But whatever had just been said in that simple, childlike voice had changed everything. The courtroom slowly came back to life. People looked around, whispering to each other, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the case file, clearly caught off guard. The officer, still at the front of the room, shifted in his seat. His eyes didn't leave the child. For a moment, he looked less like a cop and more like a man who'd just heard something he wasn't ready for. The young mother held her son close, her face pale, her hands shaking. She leaned in and whispered, "You can't say that here, sweetie." The little boy didn't respond. He just laid his head on her shoulder and stared straight ahead, eyes still full of something too big for someone so small. The judge called for a short break. People stood and began to move, but no one really left. Everyone kept watching the same 2 people, the officer and the boy. A woman from the back row approached the young mother gently. "Excuse me, did he say what I think he said? The E." Mother looked up, clearly nervous. "He's just confused. He doesn't understand what's happening." But deep down she knew it wasn't confusion. Outside in the hallway, the officer stood alone near a window. His hand was on his chin, eyes distant. Someone called his name, but he didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "That's my son." The woman beside him blinked. "I thought you weren't claiming paternity." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't. Not officially." "I didn't even know for sure. But you do now?" He nodded again, eyes still on the floor. Back in the courtroom, the mother rocked her son gently. Her thoughts were racing. She had tried to protect her boy from this. She never wanted him involved in the legal mess. She had only brought him because she couldn't find a sitter, and now the truth had slipped out in front of everyone. The break ended, and the courtroom filled again. But something had shifted. The tension had changed. Now there was curiosity, emotion. Everyone was waiting for what would happen next. The judge cleared his throat. Before we continue, I want to make something clear. This court deals in facts. We are not here to untangle personal matters unless they affect the case. He paused, looking toward the officer. However, he added, if something needs to be addressed, formally or not, it's better to bring it forward now than let it hang in the air. The officer stood. His voice was steady, but quieter than before. I'd like to speak, Your Honor. Everyone turned to face him, and just like that, the courtroom fell silent again. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken, and the air felt thick with silence. People leaned forward, waiting. No one whispered. No one moved. At the front sat a police officer in full uniform, straight-backed, with eyes that looked like they had seen too much. His face was unreadable, cold, focused, the kind of man you'd never expect to break. Across the room, a young mother sat with her little boy. The child looked no older than 3. He had messy curls, a small backpack, and wide, curious eyes that didn't miss a thing. He swung his legs under the bench, too short to reach the floor. His mother held his hand tightly, whispering things. Only he could hear. No one was really paying attention to the boy. All eyes were on the officer. This was supposed to be a formal hearing, witnesses, testimonies, statements. Just another step in a long case that had left the town on edge. Then something happened. The little boy stood up on the bench. His mother quickly tried to pull him back down, whispering, "Sit, sweetheart, not now." But the boy didn't sit. He stared straight at the police officer, and then, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, he said just 2 words. "Hi, Daddy." The entire room froze. The judge's gavel didn't move, the officer didn't blink. The crowd didn't even breathe. It was like the entire world paused in that one moment. The boy's voice was small but clear. There was no confusion, no mistake, just honesty. His mother turned red, her hand quickly wrapping around him, pulling him close to her chest. "Shh," she whispered. "Don't say that." But it was too late. Everyone had heard him. The officer's face changed. Not much, but enough. His eyes softened. His lips parted slightly. He looked at the boy like he was seeing something he didn't believe at first, something he never expected. Whispers filled the courtroom. Did he just say, "Is that his kid?" Why didn't anyone know? The judge cleared his throat. "Order, please." But no one could focus on the case anymore. Not after that. The boy stared at the officer with a small smile, as if this moment was normal, as if saying hi to his father in the middle of a courtroom wasn't strange at all. And the officer, he kept looking, not with anger, not with fear, but with something deeper, something only a few people noticed. Pain, regret, hope. No one knew what was going to happen next, but in that silent courtroom, 2 words from a child had just changed everything. The officer stood slowly. Everyone's eyes followed him as he walked toward the front of the courtroom. He wasn't stiff now. His steps were careful, quiet, like each one carried a weight he hadn't planned to face today. When he reached the center, he looked straight at the judge. "Your Honor," he began, "I'd like to speak, not as a witness, not as a police officer, as a person, and as a father." A low murmur ran through the room. The judge raised a hand, signaling for silence. The officer looked over his shoulder, right at the little boy, then at the mother. His eyes held a mixture of emotion, confusion, sadness, and something else too, something soft. He took a breath and continued. "I didn't know he was mine. I had suspicions, but I never asked. I didn't think I could be part of that child's life. I thought maybe it was better if I stayed away." The boy sat still on the bench now, as if sensing the importance of the moment. He leaned into his mother, but his eyes never left the man speaking. The officer turned back to the judge. "But I was wrong. Today he looked at me and said 2 words that I can't forget. He called me Daddy. And I saw something in his face that made it clear. He wasn't confused. He knows who I am, even if I haven't been there." The mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, holding the boy close. Her eyes were wet, her jaw tight. "I know this isn't about custody," the officer said. "It's not a family court case, but I couldn't sit here and pretend that what just happened meant nothing." He looked at the mother again. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I should have been there. I should have asked questions. I should have known." For a moment she didn't react. Then she nodded, just once, small but enough. The officer faced the judge once more. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything today, but I won't ignore him again. I won't disappear." The judge leaned forward slightly. "Is this an official statement of paternity?" "Yes, Your Honor, I'll take the test. I'll do whatever it takes. I just want the truth. And if he really is mine, I want to be in his life." The courtroom was still. Even the reporters had stopped writing. They were watching something more powerful than any legal battle. A man who had been silent for too long was finally speaking, and what he said had changed the air in the room. The little boy smiled. He didn't understand every word, but he felt it. Something had shifted, and for the first time it felt like a door had opened. The courtroom emptied slowly after the hearing ended. People walked out still whispering, still glancing back at the little boy and the officer. Something real had happened in that room, and no one was going to forget it. The mother stayed seated for a while, holding her son tightly in her lap. She looked tired, unsure, maybe even afraid. The officer stood a few steps away, waiting, not wanting to push. He could tell she was overwhelmed. So was he. Finally, she looked up at him. "You really didn't know?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "I had doubts, but you never called and I didn't ask." "I didn't want to force something that wasn't there," she said. "I didn't think you wanted him." He looked down at the little boy who was now playing with the zipper on his mother's jacket. "I didn't know I did, until today." There was a long pause between them, not angry, just heavy with everything they hadn't said in years. "He's smart," she said, "and kind. He remembers things, he watches everything." The officer nodded. "Yeah, I saw that." They stood in silence for a few more seconds. Then the little boy looked up at him and smiled. "Are you coming with us?" he asked. The question landed like a stone in the middle of still water. The officer opened his mouth to answer, but stopped. He looked at the mother. "That's not my choice," he said gently. She met his eyes. There was no fight in her voice now, only truth. "He knows who you are. You can't unhear what he said. And I can't undo the look he gave you." The officer took a deep breath. "Can we start with something small? A visit, a walk, just time?" She didn't answer right away, but then she nodded. "Okay, one step at a time." The boy clapped his hands like he'd just won a prize. "Can we go to the park?" The officer laughed just a little. "I think that's a good place to start." They walked out of the courthouse together, not as a couple, not as strangers either. Something new was beginning, something no one planned, but maybe something that was always meant to happen. Outside the sun was warm. The little boy ran ahead, skipping down the steps. The officer and the mother stood side by side, watching him. "He looks like you when he laughs," the mother said softly. The officer smiled. "I saw that too." And though there were no promises, no court orders and no perfect answers, there was something between them now, a shared truth and a second chance. A week later they met again, this time not in a courtroom but at a small park on the edge of town. It was quiet there, with just a few families scattered across the playground. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden light over everything. The little boy ran straight to the swings, laughing as he tried to climb up by himself. His mother watched from a bench nearby, her arms folded across her chest, but her eyes soft. The officer stood beside her, holding a paper bag with juice boxes and snacks. He hadn't brought much, but it felt important to bring something. "He's fast," the officer said, smiling as he watched the boy kick his legs in the air. "He never slows down," she replied, "even when he's tired." They stood there, in silence for a moment, just watching. Then she turned to him. "I didn't expect you to show up." He looked at her. "I almost didn't. I was scared." "Of what?" "Of doing it wrong, of being too late." She nodded. "It's never too late if you're really here." He sat down on the edge of the bench, still watching the boy swing higher and higher. "I've arrested people. I've dealt with danger, but I've never been this nervous. Being a parent is harder than any job," she said quietly. "But it's also the one you'll never stop wanting to get better at." The little boy jumped off the swing and ran over, laughing. He climbed onto the officer's lap without hesitation, grabbing the juice box from the bag like he'd done. "It 100 times. You came," he said proudly. "I told you I would," the officer replied, steadying him on his knee. "You can come every day if you want," the boy added. "I don't mind," the officer smiled, looking at the mother. "He's a negotiator. He gets that from me," she said with a small grin. They sat there, the three of them, sharing snacks and simple stories. The boy talked about his favorite cartoon, about the toy car he lost under the couch, about how he could almost count to 20 without help. Every word made the officer lean in a little closer, as if memorizing the sound of his son's voice. Before they left, the boy reached out and grabbed the officer's hand. "Will you come again tomorrow?" He looked at the boy, then at the mother. "If it's okay with your mum," he said gently. She nodded. "Tomorrow sounds good." As they walked to their cars, the boy holding both their hands, the air felt lighter. There were still things to work out, still papers and questions, and hard talks ahead, but for the first time it didn't feel impossible. It felt like a beginning. Days turned into weeks, and soon meeting at the park became a routine. The little boy looked forward to it like a holiday. Every morning he asked, "Is he coming today?" And most days the answer was yes. They didn't do anything special. Sometimes it was just playing in the sand, sharing ice cream, or walking around the block holding hands. But to the boy, it meant everything. And to the officer, it started meaning more than he ever expected. He wasn't in uniform during these visits. He dressed simply, trying to show up as a dad, not a cop. Each time he seemed a little more relaxed. He started bringing small toys, then books. One day he even showed up with a tiny pair of shoes that lit up when the boy ran. The boy was thrilled. He stomped his feet again and again just to see the lights flash. The mother watched all of it with cautious hope. She hadn't forgotten the past, but she saw something changing, not just in the man who once stayed silent, but in her son. He was happier, brighter. He talked more, laughed more. One day, as they sat on the grass, the officer turned to her. "I don't want to just be a visitor." She looked at him, unsure what he meant. "I want to be part of his life, really part of it, not just when it's convenient, not just in the park." She stayed quiet, thinking. "I know I messed up," he continued. "I know I missed time I can't get back, but I'm here now and I'm not walking away." She looked at her son, who was busy picking flowers and handing them to a stray dog, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "You have to be sure," she said. "Because he's sure. Every time you show up, he becomes more sure. And if you ever stop, it'll break him." "I won't stop," he said. "I promise." He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. The way he said it was enough. She nodded. "Okay, then let's figure it out." Later that evening, the boy was dozing off in the back seat of her car, holding one of the toy trucks his dad had brought. She glanced at him in the mirror, his face peaceful, his mouth slightly open in sleep. She thought about how far they had come. From a courtroom full of strangers to this quiet, sleepy ride home after a day full of laughter. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew one thing now. Her son wasn't carrying the weight of being fatherless anymore, because someone had finally shown up and stayed. The morning was quiet. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen window as the boy sat at the table, swinging his legs and eating cereal one piece at a time. His mother stood by the sink, watching him with a soft smile. It had been months since the courtroom, and everything felt different now, brighter, lighter. There was a knock at the door. The boy's head shot up. "Daddy!" He jumped down from his chair before she could stop him and ran to the door, yanking it open with both hands. There, he was, his dad, holding a small backpack and a smile that reached his eyes. "You ready for our big day?" the officer asked, kneeling to the boy's level. The boy nodded fast. "We're going to the zoo and the playground and then ice cream." His mother walked over, shaking her head with a laugh. "Let's just see how much you can fit into." One day, the officer looked up at her. "Thanks for letting me take him. You've earned it," she said. "He loves these days." He stood and took the backpack from her. "I'll bring him back by dinner, and I'll text you updates," she nodded. "Just be careful with his excitement. He gets ahead of himself." "I know," he said gently. "I've been learning, as..." They walked to the car. The boy grabbed his father's hand. It fit naturally now, like they'd been doing it forever. The officer helped him into his seat, buckled him in, and turned on the radio to the boy's favorite songs. As they drove off, the boy leaned back, eyes wide, taking in the world outside the window. They spent the day laughing, pointing at animals, and racing across the playground. The officer had never felt so tired, and never so alive. Each time, the boy looked up at him with wonder or trust. Something inside him grew stronger. This wasn't a duty anymore. It wasn't about making up for the past. It was about showing up every single day. When they returned that evening, the boy was asleep in the back seat, ice cream still smudged on his cheek. His mother opened the door and smiled. "Looks like you wore him out," she said. "Best kind of tired," the officer replied. She carried him in gently, laying him on the couch. He stirred but didn't wake. His hand still held a small toy lion from the zoo gift shop. The officer stood at the doorway watching them. "Thank you," he said quietly. She turned to him. "For what?" "For giving me a chance." She nodded, eyes soft. "He's lucky to have you now." He shook his head. "I'm the lucky one." And as he stepped outside into the quiet evening, he knew this wasn't a moment. It was a life. One he had almost missed. One he would never let go again.